Good afternoon, everyone. Authors at Google New York is pleased to welcome today Dr. Orrin Hesterman. Dr. Hesterman is the president and CEO of Fair Food Network, and he is here today to present his book, Fair Food, Growing a Healthy, Sustainable Food System for All. As stated in the bio in his book, if you read on the cover there, for 15 years, Dr. Hesterman has co-led the integrated farming systems and food and society programs for the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, during which time the foundation seeded the local food systems movement with over $200 million. In Fair Food, Dr. Hesterman outlines the changes which must be made regarding not just how we eat, but how food is grown, packaged, delivered, marketed, sold, and addressed by public policy. Thus outlining the steps we all must take beyond just eating organic. Dr. Hesterman.
Thank you very much. It was very good to be here with you today. Thank you for the invitation and for your interest in this topic. I'm going to try to, I think we have about an hour together, so I'm going to try to keep my remarks short enough so maybe we spend half the time with me talking a little bit about the book, what's in it, why I wrote it, and a little bit about the work we do at Fair Food Network. But I want to save about half of the time to hear what's on your mind, what questions you have, what comments you have, how you're thinking about this issue. So, if we're going to create a healthy and sustainable food system for everybody, I would say the single, you were asking me before, what can we do? What can a person do? I would say the single most important action for somebody to take is to make the transformation from conscious consumer to engaged citizen. So what do I mean by that? So I'm 36 years old. Now, I'm not 36 years old right now. Most of you aren't even there yet, right? But when I was 36 years old, I'm lying in a hospital bed with such a severe flare-up of ulcerative colitis that my digestive system has stopped functioning altogether. Lying there with an IV in my arm, being pumped full of prednisone, and the doc comes in and says, if this inflammation doesn't cool down, by the end of the week, our only option is surgery. So I'm lying there faced with losing my colon for the rest of my life. A couple days later, when the doc says, okay, we think you could eat something now, in comes a tray, as I'm lying in bed, roast beef, a pile of mashed potatoes, and some big-ass piece of cake. White flour, white sugar cake. And I look at this food and I say, no way. I know this is not the food that I need to get my body healthy. So I politely send it back, pick up the phone, call a friend and ask her, would you please come save my life this week? Can you make some brown rice, tofu, and steamed greens and bring them to me in the hospital? So fortunately, I got better. And knock on wood, I'm now healthy as can be. But while I was lying in bed during that week in the hospital, I was thinking about how fortunate I was that I both knew what I needed to eat to get my body healthy, and I had the access to what I needed. And I also thought about all the people who either don't have the education and knowledge, or if they have the knowledge, they simply don't have the access. I live in Ann Arbor, and a lot of our work at Fair Food Network is in Southeast Michigan in the Detroit area. Now, Detroit might be the most severe situation of a food desert in the country, where over half the population of the city of Detroit, the 11th largest city in the country, they don't have access to fresh food and healthy food. In fact, since 2007, there's not a single supermarket in the city of Detroit, not one. But it's a situation you can find in almost any inner city community in this country, including places in parts of New York. So the question is, why should you care about this? I mean, all of us lead very busy lives, right? And you probably have certain causes that you care about. My hope with writing my book and with visiting with you is that you can think about moving the idea of repairing the food system a few notches higher on your list. And this is why it's important to care about it. One reason why it's important to care about it. A few months ago, I was in an audience, much like this, but a little larger, listening to the executive vice president of the largest health insurance company in the country. And here's what he says. He says, we've looked at the trends, we've run the numbers, we've done the predictions, and our numbers tell us that by 2018, the cost of treating obesity-related illness in the United States will be $345 billion a year. He says when that happens, it not only bankrupts our company, it bankrupts this country. So why should you care, and why do we have to care? Because if that happens, if that actually happens, and current trends are taking us there, I don't know how many of us will be able to afford health insurance. And the burden on all of us for paying for health care for those who aren't insured will be more than we can bear. And all that happens in 2018 or somewhere down the road, depending on the predictions, because we're not doing enough today to create food environments that enable people to access the food to keep them healthy. You've got a great food environment here at Google. I know about that. And it's wonderful. And the point I make over and over in the book is that we need to take the health and vitality that we gain from living in a healthy food environment and make sure that it's not just us, it's everybody. There's a lot in the story I'm telling about what's happening with obesity and diet-related illness and food access, there's a lot of bad news, I know that. But there's actually some good news, really good news, I promise you. Because we really are sitting at an historic moment right now, a moment where the rising tide of diet-related illness and obesity is being matched by an upswell of resources, of ideas, and of action and awareness on this issue. We're at a moment where we actually know what to do about this. Many systems that are broken in our country, we're not sure what to do. I mean, how the heck do you reform healthcare? Nobody seems to know how to really do that. What are we going to do about our energy systems? But with our food system, we know what to do. We know what a fair food system means and how to create it. And if there's one thing you remember from what I'm saying today, I want you to remember what I mean by a fair food system. It's a system where the food is healthy, good for our bodies, green, grown in an environmentally responsible way, fair, nobody is exploited in that system. Everybody gets a piece of the economic pie, and affordable. Everybody has access to the food. And we know how to create these systems now. And the way I know that is because I can see models and examples in practice, in communities, and in public policy with those kind of features embedded in them all across the country. So we know what to do about this. That's the good news. 20 years ago, we didn't, but now we do. And it's happening at many levels. It's happening at the policy level. I think about the great work of our First Lady Michelle Obama and her Let's Move initiative focusing on this. Or I think about the thousands of farm-to-school projects happening now that are supported with federal dollars, with more federal dollars coming. It's happening at the commercial level. And this is something I want to spend a little bit of time with because that's the sector where you folks live and work. It's happening everything from Whole Foods to the increase in the number of farmers markets around the country, tripled since the mid-90s. How many of you like going to farmers markets? I mean, I love going to a farmer's market. Wherever I am, whether I'm home in Ann Arbor or when I travel around, if I'm there on market day, that's where I want to go. It's like the happiest place in any city I go. And they're just exploding. They're on the increase. But it goes beyond farmers markets and grocery stores. I've learned a little bit about how you do your food service here at Google, both here and in California. Most of the food being sourced within 150 miles. A real focus on using food from local and sustainable sources. And I think it's great that your company and other companies are starting to do this. And just to give you an idea, it's starting to happen in a lot of places. Dow Chemical, based in Midland, Michigan, has 43,000 employees around the globe. And they are focusing on bringing healthier food to their employees primarily because they want to get better health outcomes. I mean, they see it as a way to reduce their costs for health insurance. So it's smart. Another company, Bon Appetit Management Company, is an interesting one to look at. So they oversee food service in more than 400 cafeterias in 31 states around the country. They serve more than 120 million meals each year. And they have a company-wide goal that they are going to purchase 20% of all of the ingredients that they use in those 120 million meals from farms that are within 150 miles of each cafeteria, that are from small owner-operated farms or artisan food processors. And some of the corporations they work with that they're sourcing food like this: Abercrombie and Fitch in Ohio, Amazon headquarters in Seattle, eBay in San Jose, and Medtronic headquarters in Minneapolis, just a few. So it's really, to me, very cool to see companies like yours and many others starting to see that this is not, yes, it's about what they can do for employees and employee morale and employee health. From my perspective, it's also about what they're doing for the food system. It goes beyond individual consumers, and it starts to be an institutional practice, which is what we need to be doing. It's also happening at the community level. And that's kind of the level nearest and dearest to my heart because of all my work in the nonprofit sector and the foundation sector. And just a few examples here in New York. In Brooklyn, there's a fantastic project called Added Value. It's a farm in Red Hook where youngsters are working, teenagers from the neighborhood are working on about a 3-acre organic farm that was created on the top of a ball field. And they've got a farmer's market there, so the kids are earning money and growing food. I think of Slow Food USA, which has its headquarters right here in New York and connecting with about 200,000 people all over the country on this issue. Grow NYC, that supports 64 farmers markets all across the city. And the most significant part about Grow NYC is that out of those 64 markets, 49 of them accept what's called EBT, Electronic Benefits Transfer. And you'll hear me talk a little bit more about this. It's how food stamps are used now. So we now have about 44 million people in this country receiving food stamps from the government. It's the largest single flow of funds in our agriculture through USDA and in our agriculture department at the federal level. More than 70 cents of every dollar we spend as a nation on our agriculture is spent on food stamps. And Grow NYC is making sure that the healthy, fresh, locally grown food at farmers markets is also accessible to people who are on food stamps, who have their EBT card. So that's just a few of the examples here in New York, and there are many, 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 many more. But in almost every case, local brilliance is really leading the way in this movement, and it's all about innovation, all about innovation. And I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk to you about my experience with innovation in this field in a couple of different ways. So I'm probably older than almost everybody here, right? But there was a point at which I was younger than almost everybody here when I started my career, initially as an organic farmer. That sort of transformed into a business opportunity for me. So I was living and working on an organic farm out in Santa Cruz. It was at the University of California at Santa Cruz. In hindsight, it turned out to be one of the first, I think it was the first student organic farm in the country. And we had 17 acres of land, and there was a group of us. We were using French intensive methods of growing beautiful organic vegetables. And it was the time, this was back in the early 70s, at the time when the sort of natural food movement was just starting to be seen. It was in its real infancy. No such thing as Whole Foods or even Trader Joe's, nothing like that. It was all independently owned stores, restaurants that were starting to use organic food. And we started selling some of our food. It was actually bartering, right? So the produce folks from some of these stores would come up from the town of Santa Cruz, help us harvest our squash and lettuce and carrots in the morning, take them back and sell them in their store, and then we would get credit in their store for buying the nuts and seeds and cheese and flour and other things we needed at the farms. That's how we were surviving there. One day, one of the produce produce managers from one of those stores came up to the farm, and while we're harvesting, he says, we're starting to have people walk into our store. This is like 1972. We have people walking into our store asking if they could buy alfalfa sprouts, but nobody's growing alfalfa sprouts commercially. Have you ever grown alfalfa sprouts? Okay, so you take alfalfa seed. It's a really healthy food. You take alfalfa seed. You probably had bean sprouts at a Chinese restaurant maybe. So alfalfa sprouts, you take alfalfa seed, you sprout it just for a few days, and it's a very good source of many vitamins. And you can find them in a health food store, but there were no sprouts being grown commercially. So we took that on and started growing alfalfa sprouts in these big jars, big sort of mayonnaise buckets with screens in the bottom, and delivering them to the stores or giving them to the stores with our vegetables. About a year later, most of the folks who were working on that farm left the project to go start farming in Arkansas, but I was still a California boy, and I'm not ready to go to Arkansas. I'm not ready to live in the Ozarks. So I inherited that alfalfa sprout business. What that means is I scraped up $75 to buy the one bag of alfalfa seed that we had on hand. I inherited the buckets. I started growing the sprouts in the buckets and delivering on the back of my bicycle to the 3 accounts. By about 8 years later, this was a business that had 20 employees delivering sprouts all over Northern California, shipping them to Southern California, air shipping some sprouts to Chicago. We were the first alfalfa sprouts in the Safeway chain of stores. I was introducing this new product to people locally in delis to use on sandwiches, in restaurants to use on salad bars. I was introducing them to the wholesale produce market. I was introducing them to the big retail chains. And we were, by the time I sold the business at the end of the 70s, we were growing and selling 9 tons of sprouts a month. Now, next time you're in the grocery store, I want you to go look at alfalfa sprouts, and you're going to see what the sort of bulk of a 4-ounce package is. And then do the math, and you'll get a sense of what 9 tons of sprouts a month is. That was a big operation in those days. It was very successful. I sold it for enough money to go back to graduate school, which I did to earn my PhD in agronomy and plant genetics because I was very interested in the science of all this. My point in telling you the story is that, whenever people say to me, the reason the food system is like it is and has to stay like it is because there are really no options. There are no other options besides doing it the way we're doing it. And I say, from my experience, you're wrong. There is innovation available in every field all the time. And you all know this. You live it. It's part of what has made your company successful, and it's what's going to propel success in your company and in your individual careers. So that's one story of innovation from my own life in the for-profit sector when I was younger. I also want to share with you, did these get handed out? Yeah, let's hand these out so folks can see it while I'm talking about it. I also want to share with you a project that we're doing right now at the Fair Food Network, which is the nonprofit organization that I founded about 2 years ago. So I had spent, after being a professor at Michigan State University, I had spent another career, I guess that would be my 3rd career at Kellogg Foundation. And at Kellogg Foundation, I helped them develop a funding program in sustainable food and agriculture and was able to fund projects all over the country that were looking at innovation in the food system, trying to embed some of these principles I was just talking about into projects, into policy, into practices. And we were able to fund about $200 million worth of projects all over the country and really kind of seeded this local food movement over a period of years. Well, now I'm in the nonprofit sector, and one of the signature programs that we're running at Fair Food Network, and my colleague Anthony here is our communications and policy director and is responsible for our beautiful communications material, and Lucinda works with us on outreach at the Fair Food Network. And this project, Double Up Food Bucks, the way it works is that anybody who comes to a farmer's market participating in the program, and right now there's about 50 of them across the state of Michigan, with their EBT card. Remember I talked about the electronic benefits transfer card. They bring their card to a farmer's market, swipe it at a kiosk to spend, say, $20 at the market that day. they will get an additional $20 of what we call double up food buck tokens. So they spend $20 and they get $40 worth of buying power. The token can only be spent on Michigan-grown fruits and vegetables. So what we're doing with this program is we're encouraging people, we're incentivizing them to bring their federal food assistance dollars. Right now, I talked about the percentage of our agriculture budget federally that goes into this. If you look at the numbers, it's about $70 billion a year. So we're spending about $70 billion a year of our taxpayer money on food stamps. Now, I don't argue with that. I mean, people are hungry. I think we have responsibility to help them eat. What we're missing is an opportunity to innovate and to use that flow of federal funds to both encourage low-income families to eat healthier, at the same time using those exact same dollars to support local farmers and a local food economy. And that's what we're doing with Double Up Food Bucks. We're demonstrating on a statewide basis now in Michigan the feasibility and effectiveness of these kinds of monetary incentives to do those two things at the same time. Eat healthier food for your family and for your kids, and support the local food economy and local agriculture. So far, the program is going really well. We're in our second of 4 years of this demonstration. And at the largest farmers market in inner city Detroit, again, the place where there's not a single supermarket, we saw an increase from last year, from 2009 to 2010, we saw an increase of sales from the EBT card of 368%. So when you let people know about a program like that and you have it in place, people will use it. And now part of our work at Fair Food Network is to share these kinds of results and this kind of innovation with our policymakers in Washington, D.C., because we believe we can do a lot better job with that $70 billion a year than we're doing right now. And that's part of what we'll be working on over the next couple of years. So as I'm going around talking to people about the book and what I wrote about and why I wrote it, some people consider it a sort of a celebration of the publication of a book. And I actually consider it a celebration of the maturity of a movement. You know, I've been at this since the early 70s. It's been my entire life career in different forms. But I'm seeing now an upswell of concern and excitement, especially among young people, about healthy food and sustainability in the food system like I've never seen. So I'm really saying we're celebrating the maturity of a movement. This is a movement that is coming to maturity. And you know, it hasn't always been this way. I think about a time about 15 years ago. I'm sitting at a coffee shop in Atlanta. It's a Sunday morning, and I'm waiting for a couple of friends to come meet me. And down the street comes Gary and Sandy, and Gary can't wait to hand me a newspaper. It's the New York Times Magazine from that day. And it's I look at it, and there's an article written by an author I'd never read before, Michael Pollan. We were talking about this beforehand. So I see some of you nodding. So you've been reading Michael Pollan's work. Well, you know, this was his first article in the New York Times Magazine. It was about genetically modified potatoes and the farmers that are growing them. And I thought to myself, my God, this issue is now starting to hit mainstream. I mean, we had never seen even an article in the New York Times about this stuff. I mean, you see it all the time now. 15 years ago, it wasn't there at all. So I practically inhaled the article, and I'm celebrating in the street, thinking, my God, our time is coming. This issue is finally getting covered by the press, as it should. So you can imagine how excited I was a couple of years ago when I learned that Bill Moyers was going to be interviewing Michael Pollan. So Bill Moyers, one of the most esteemed television journalists of our times, one of his last episodes of Bill Moyers' Journal, he's interviewing Michael Pollan. And Moyers is asking great questions, and Pollan is giving great answers, and it's a great interview. And toward the end, Moyers asked Pollan, okay, Michael, if you now have the viewers convinced this food thing is something they should pay attention to, what's the one thing you would tell them to do to make a difference? And without missing a beat, Pollan says, plant a garden. And I said to myself, oh, shit. I felt so disappointed at that moment. I wasn't disappointed at Michael's answer. I mean, I know how important it is to grow gardens. I grow a garden myself at my home in Ann Arbor. I know growing a garden can change your life. More gardens, the better. But I was so disappointed at that moment because I realized how many important answers there are to that question and how many more voices need to be out responding to it. Michael Pollan and Eric Schlosser and the folks who made the movie Food Inc., I have the utmost respect for them. They have done a great job at helping point out the problems and the challenges with our current food system. But we have to move beyond growing gardens. We have to take the next step, which is the next step in finding solutions, not just mapping out problems. And my belief is that next step is the shift from conscious consumer to engaged citizen. And that's why I wrote Fair Food, to help be part of taking that next step. You know, I wrote this book for several kinds of people. I wrote it for folks who lead busy lives and might just have a couple of hours a week that they can spend on making better choices in their homes, in their communities, with their families. I also wrote it for people who now all over the country are getting so excited about this work that they're putting some of their passion into it. I mean, that they're really focusing on this because this book is a resource coming from 40 years of experience in the field. I also wrote it for policymakers so we can get better public policy, public policy that makes sure everybody has access to healthy food, and policy that helps farmers reduce their toxic chemical load on the environment and save our precious soil. And I wrote it from all the different perspectives that I've had in my life, you know, farmer, sprout businessman, agronomist, university professor, foundation program director, foundation executive. I don't know about you. I don't know how many times you think you're going to change your jobs in your career. I never thought I'd change jobs this many times. But in hindsight, it's really great because it brings so many different perspectives into this work. So I just want to end my comments and then really encourage you to let me know what you're thinking and any questions you have. I just want to end with another story about a time around 25 years ago when a group of engaged citizens changed a system that seemed hopeless. Many people tell me, how the heck can you think about changing a food system, an agriculture system that's so big and so entrenched? In 1988, you could not find a single political scientist predicting the fall of the Berlin Wall. But 1 year later, that's exactly what happened. It surprised everybody. Well, I think about all of the activists in East Germany struggling under a system that was strangling them, a system that wanted to change. And then in 1989, literally those same people picking up hammers and chisels and start banging against a wall. I mean, we'll never know which brick came out to make that wall fall down. But when it came down, it changed the world. I mean, for us, you know, for those in my generation who lived through that, it absolutely changed the world. I mean, the Cold War ended almost overnight, shifted geopolitics. In the same way, I think about food systems activists, many of whom I have met and supported over time all across this country. Farmers, chefs, students, teachers, moms, dads, journalists, business people, each of them working in their own way to challenge a food system that is not working well for us right now. Just as with the Berlin Wall, we will never know which innovation, which new model is the one that brings us to a tipping point. But it will happen sooner or later. I wrote my book so it could happen sooner and not later. And I really hope that you will take the opportunity to read it, to learn from it, and to ask questions about it, because this is an ongoing process for all of us. It's the system that's most important for all of us. It's a system on which our life depends. If we don't get the food system right, I would say anything else we're doing is going to be less important, if important at all. It's the system we have to get right. So now let me open it up and see what's on your mind and what questions you might have. Yes?
Okay, so I actually have two questions. The first one is, how do you define healthy food? Because I feel that most people that even want to eat healthy, they don't know what's healthy, and there are so many sources of information.
So, like when we talk about in our Double Up Food Bucks program, we're talking about creating what we're calling a healthy food incentive. And you are right, there is so much information. It's hard to read through it all, but there is very little contradiction that eating more fresh fruits and vegetables in your diet is good. That very few of us are eating the amount that's recommended by USDA. And if you look at in our low-income communities, you're lucky to find a lot of folks who are eating more than 1 or 2 servings a day. So we are really focusing on fruits and vegetables as the component of a healthy diet in our work.
Okay. And the second question is it's actually continuing to your answer. So if you suggest fruit and vegetables, do you also recommend adding the incentive of keeping the animals safe, like the environmental reasons of growing animals or eating them?
So I'm not sure if you're asking me about the idea of vegetarianism or the idea of how to sustainably raise animals.
I believe it goes together. That being vegetarian, it's helping the environment and also keeping you healthy.
So I've not seen a lot of, as a scientist now, I've not seen a lot of data that says vegetarianism is required to be healthy, right?
Okay.
Now, at the same time, we know that in general, in our society, our Western culture, we're eating way too much meat. As an agronomist, which is the way I look at the world the most, there are places where our natural ecology is much better suited for animal agriculture than for crop agriculture. I mean, in one sense, ruminant animals are pretty miraculous. You know, the animals that have multiple stomachs because they can digest cellulose. We can't. You know, single stomached animals can't. And there are places where producing grass, which is mostly cellulose, and it's got nutrients in it, but a lot of cellulose, where producing grass is the absolute best ecological plan. And so my feeling is on those kinds of acreages, we're actually better off producing animals than we are trying to put it into crops. We're going to save the soil. We're going to be able to create systems where the nutrients are recycled. So I'm actually a believer in integrating crops and livestock in an agriculture, but doing it in a way that's more environmentally sensitive.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you for the questions.
So over here, you speak about, taking us in from conscious consumers into engaged citizens, but you're speaking to the choir here. Now, what about reaching out to other people, even getting them to the point of even being conscious consumers? Because there's a lot of people out there, again, lives are busy, or they're misinformed, a lot of bad information out there, a lot of marketing touting vitamins and this sort of stuff instead of actual real food. How can we actually get people to be concerned and understand that this is good for the environment, it's good for their health, and it's also most cost effective for them?
Right. When I say move from conscious consumer to engaged citizen, I don't assume that everybody are conscious consumers yet. I mean, I know that. The point I'm trying to make is that the frame that the way we think about food is primarily a frame that it's a relationship between me and my plate, me and my refrigerator, or, at the farthest outreach, maybe me in the grocery store. And what I'm trying to do is actually shift our frame of reference to understand that when we think about food, it's sort of like when we think about the healthcare system, we actually don't usually think about our own personal doctor. And when we think about what it's going to take to reform the healthcare system, none of us think about, choosing a different doctor is going to make a difference in reforming healthcare. So what I'm trying to do is help us move ourselves along in our thought process around food, where when we think about food, we're not only thinking about my relationship with food and the plate, we're thinking about the consequences of my actions all along the system. And when you think about that, then, if somebody is going to take, if a legislator is going to take the right stand on Farm Bill legislation, I don't really care what they eat, to tell you the truth. on a personal level. What I care is about the actions they are taking to make our food system healthier and more sustainable.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
Hi.
Hi.
It seems like there's a lot of great grassroots movements in terms of local farms and co-ops producing organic and sustainable fruits and veggies, but it seems like the major shift that needs to happen is to do this at scale so it's economically viable and those things become priced at a competitive rate to factory farm produce. To your knowledge, is there any sort of example out there of a farm that's doing this at a great scale in terms of bringing this into economic viability?
Yeah. So first of all, I want us to challenge our assumptions that locally produced organic food is more expensive. Study just came out of Vermont. Probably the study was actually done last year, but it was just published. A group of students went out and looked at, they did good statistics with it. They looked at the price of vegetables and fruits at farmers markets and at the grocery stores and supermarkets in the same communities. And for non-organic fruits and vegetables, there was very little significant difference. There was some difference in specific items, but there wasn't a lot of difference. For organic, the difference between supermarket and farmer's market was 38%, with the farmer's market being 38% lower than the supermarket.
Oh, wow.
So, we have to challenge our assumptions. There's a lot of information out there about, oh yeah, local produce and farmers market, all this stuff is so expensive, it's only for the elite. The experience actually, when you start looking at the evidence, it's not so much. That's sort of on the one hand. In terms of the example you asked for, I think about a friend of mine, Fred Kirschenman, who's farming in North Dakota. He's farming 3,100 acres of organic grains, seeds, and livestock. And, if that's not scale, I'm not sure what is.
Right.
So it's, it has already gone beyond small scale. And the question of affordability, my belief is the question of affordability comes down to not just scaling an individual farm, but scaling a system.
Right.
Where we know the demand for locally grown, organic, and sustainably raised food is increasing. We know that. Right. And I've worked with enough farmers to know they are very good business people. And if they recognize this demand as real, credible, and stable, they will shift their practices. This is where institutional purchasing can come in, because companies, institutions like schools, hospitals, correctional facilities can actually create contracts to purchase local and organic and sustainable food.
Right.
And then farmers have something that's actually, a contract that's bankable to borrow money to get to scale up. One of the missing pieces we have right now is what I call the regional food infrastructure, where you have an infrastructure right now where 47% of all retail grocery in this country is controlled by 4 companies. And when that happens, the entire distribution system has been vertically integrated with those companies. And we need to reestablish a more regional food infrastructure so that each individual farmer doesn't bear the responsibility of having to find the individual consumer to connect with. But there's actually a way to aggregate and distribute. So some of the things we're working on, some of the activists you talk about in the organizations are working not just on the individual level, but that kind of aggregation.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question was actually very similar to the previous one, but I can sort of go off of that. In terms of the subsidies, the government subsidies for larger farms and stuff like that, I see that as a pretty large hurdle for a smaller farm to overcome, and because of the economic incentive behind that government subsidy. So what you're sort of alluding to is this shift, right, from government subsidy to sort of a privatized system, like companies investing in farms. How do you see that? What's the incentive for that farm that was getting the subsidy for corn or something like that, shifting to a totally different model? Maybe they've already invested in that kind of equipment. Is there a system out there to help them make that transition, or is that still sort of gray area?
Well, as you talk about that, what I would think about, wouldn't it be great if we decided, we're a democracy. We get to decide how we spend our tax money if, in the perfect world. And what about if we decided, rather than spending our $5 to $8 billion a year in subsidy money on just supporting 10% of the largest farmers in this country growing 5 crops that we know there's surpluses of, what if we decided that we would use some of that money to help farmers transition to a kind of agriculture that we're talking about, a more regional scale agriculture, producing a more diversity of crops, doing it in an environmentally friendly way? There's no reason why we can't do that. I don't advocate getting rid of subsidies, actually. I think that, I think about, it wasn't too long ago that we had political leaders on both sides of the aisle talk about these companies that were too big to fail, right? And a lot of money went into companies that we thought were too big to fail. Well, rather than too big to fail, I say our food system is too important to fail, and it's failing a lot of us right now. In fact, if you scratch the surface from an environmental perspective, from a perspective of how farm workers are treated and live, this system is failing most of us right now. So there is nothing wrong, in my view, in a democracy for us to decide that we need to intervene with resources of any kind into a sector that's too important to fail. We're just doing it in the wrong way. We need to do more of what you're talking about, the ideas you have about how to help farmers transition to a more reasonable and sustainable kind of production.
So is that more, sorry, this is just a follow-up.
Yeah.
Is that more of a community outreach and a marketing issue as well, sort of, reaching out to farmers and on a local level, or is that something that is lobbying territory?
Listen, it's always going to be lobbying territory because you've got a lot of vested interest in our agribusiness to have things the way they are. But let me give you an example. So over the last 2 years, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is an agency of USDA, decided, because we have a new scene at USDA with President Obama and Secretary Vilsack and Deputy Secretary Merrigan. They're thinking very, very innovatively. So they come up with this plan to use some of our federal conservation dollars to support the building of what's called high tunnels or hoop houses. So in the northern climates like here, local food is great right now, and it'll be great until about Thanksgiving time, right? And then from December through May or so, there's not much there. But there are great technologies that have been developed that they're called high tunnels. They're just big plastic, might be the length of this room, literally a hoop with greenhouse grade plastic over it. And there are ways to extend the growing season without any exogenous source of energy. So you don't have to heat them. The re-radiation from the soil takes care of that. There are ways to grow crops in there. So the USDA is now giving grants, cost-share grants to farmers all across the country, in the northern part of the country, to build these hoop houses. I think that's great. That's a great use of our government funding. It's extending the growing season. It's helping to create some of this more regional infrastructure for production. I just think we need more innovation like that in our policies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So I was listening to this article or this story on NPR about a month back with somebody who was criticizing the local and slow food movement, and I'm not remember his name, unfortunately, but realizing that this transition wouldn't take place overnight, I'm wondering if there's any validity to the argument that the guy was making, which was that essentially there's not enough local farmers producing food to feed everybody. Do you know if there's any truth to that? Like, if we were to all switch right now, would there even be enough on the supply side to meet the demand?
Well, not tomorrow there wouldn't be. But
Right.
again, my experience working directly with farmers, I spent a good 15 years working in extension in Michigan, where I was directly working with farmers and extension agents all over the state. And I've gotten to know farmers. And I was farming myself, when I was younger. Farmers are good business people. If there is a demand there, they'll figure out how to fill it. Mm-hmm. If we if we just said, could we make the switch tomorrow? Absolutely not. but if we said to ourselves, is there a vision for what our future food system needs to look like so it's environmentally healthy, it's healthy for our communities, it's healthy economically, and then start moving towards that with policy and practice? Absolutely, there is no reason why we can't. And I don't advocate for a wholesale switch. But right now, we have about 98% of our food system is highly concentrated, highly specialized, highly globalized, and about 2% of it is the kind of system that we're talking about, more localized, more diverse, more environmentally sound. I would be pleased as punch if within my lifetime we saw a shift from 2% to 20%. That would be huge. It would change the landscape of food and agriculture. So when people bring up arguments about how, well, we can't even start to make the change because you can't do it 100%, I think it's a spurious argument. I think it's a deflection, and I think we ought to dismiss it and say, fine, maybe we can't do 100%, but I'll bet you we can do 20.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Oren.
Emily.
Hi. So my question is, if we are all to become engaged citizens, let's say we all go back to our desks today and decide that we want to do something, this sounds like a planted question, but I promise it's not. What are the 2 or 3 things that we can do? Is it to write to a local legislator and say, support these changes in the Farm Bill? Is it to volunteer, out in Red Hook, at the garden? What exactly is it that we can do today or next week or this weekend? What are the things we can start actually looking into doing, as we're inspired by your book and your work?
What I say is that it's important to start where you are. Mm-hmm. And that's why I would never say everybody should do this or this or this. I would say that if you're a parent and you have youngsters in school and you care about the food that they're eating and being fed in school, that's where you ought to engage. You should start getting together with other parents and learning about how the school food service works, where they're sourcing their food, and try to make a few small changes. Start small. If you're a college student, I would say the place to start would be getting in touch with the Real Food Challenge, which is working to shift 20% of the $5 billion that our college and university cafeterias are spending nationwide. If you live in an area that is rapidly urbanizing, so I talk about people who live in suburbs, rapidly urbanizing, I say, look into farmland preservation policy. And there's some examples in the book of where that's happening and how to do it. You've got great opportunities right here in New York, as Emily says, to volunteer with organizations, to spend your time and your money supporting organizations. They are all over this city. This city is rich with organizations that are working to help make the kind of change we're talking about here. And they all need volunteers. They all need financial support. So there's no lack of those kinds of opportunities. And many directories, and there's a directory in the back of my book, and we're right now developing our online directory at our website so that organizations that are not listed in the book, it's in the chapter 10 of the book where I list all these organizations, but that want other people to know about them, can self-populate this directory that's starting to build out on our website so people can find each other. Something else that you're uniquely qualified to do because you live in New York, and that is you have a senator, Senator Gillibrand, who really cares about these issues. And she is on the Senate Agriculture Committee and is going to be one of the people who's helping to consider the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, which is the place where the subsidies happen, the place where these hoop house resources happen, the place where our food stamp expenditures happen. So one thing everybody can definitely do is let your own Senator Gillibrand know that you care about these issues and you want to support her to support the kinds of policies that we're talking about and that I'm writing about.
Great.
So there's a few things people can do here.
And I just have one more quick question.
Yes.
Just because I think it's such a great program, the Double Up Food Bucks,
Mm-hmm.
is that after the 4 years demonstration that you're doing now in Michigan, are there plans to expand that to areas like New York or DC or Philly or places like that?
Right now, there are some other programs. There is something happening in Philly. In New York, there's something called Health Bucks. It's a little different. We are working now, partnering with organizations all over the country that are supporting these programs, and we're doing a nationwide evaluation and creating what we're saying is a policy education process. So there'll be some lobbying involved, but it's mostly education. And our intention is that When the next farm bill is reauthorized, we want to bring some federal dollars flowing into this kind of incentive work so it's not only financed by nonprofit money. So tell your Senator Gillibrand that you think healthy food incentives are a great idea and you want her to support them in the next farm bill. And that's a very specific thing you can do and something that she can help with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
To go along with that, for the mic, please. The healthy food incentives. So is that an educational component? Because I do feel like lower income people feel that healthy food is just for wealthy people, and farmers markets are for wealthy people. So is there that educational component that no, like it is affordable and using your dollars there can
Absolutely.
go a long way?
Absolutely. I am not at all a believer in if you build it, they will come. And I'm sorry Anthony had to leave. He had to take a train back to D.C. But he has really been working hard with communications. So our communications around this includes direct mail, very bright and colorful and engaging postcards to every person who is receiving food stamps in Detroit, Flint, Grand Rapids, and Lansing, Michigan, the 4 biggest cities in the state, 3 times during the summer, telling them about the program and how to access it. We've got radio running in those places. We have billboards this summer. There'll be 50 billboards all over Detroit and other areas telling people about it. We're doing bus signs. And in addition, we're working in a more grassroots way. So we've actually hired people in these communities who live in those communities, working with churches, working with barbers and beauticians to really get the word out about this program. The one assumption that I hear you say that I would challenge from our own research is that folks in these low-income communities don't understand what healthy food is. They really do.
No, I don't assume that they don't understand. I just think that they might not think it's accessible.
Well,
to
they
them.
know it's not accessible. I mean, that's the issue. We've done the focus group work, we've done the interview work. You know, most people in our low-income communities of color understand that lack of access to healthy, fresh food is, in essence, a social justice issue. They see it as nutritional redlining. That's what I call it. You know, a generation ago, we had redlining in terms of home mortgages, right? There were literally, like, mortgage banks would draw red lines around communities that they would not lend to. And it was almost always low-income communities of color. And that's why one reason home ownership was much lower there. Well, that's an illegal practice. You can't do that anymore. But from my perspective, we have, in essence, nutritional redlining. We have whole vast areas in our inner cities where conventional food retail has basically said, we're out of here. And we got to do something about that. It's not to our own benefit to let that happen. But you're right, we have to let people know about this program. And we're doing it in every way we know how.
Okay.
And in every way we can afford.
And one more question. Is local more sustainable or seasonal more of a sustainable food?
Well, if
direction?
you think about it, they go together, right? Because if you're going to eat local, you're going to be eating seasonal. So in some respects, if you think more about eating seasonally, it is automatically going to drive you toward eating food that's produced more in the area where you're living.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Well, that's it. That's all we have time for. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you.